Africa is the birthplace of humanity, the foundation of civilization, and the original home of advanced healing. Long before the world spoke the name, long before Greece wrote its first medical notes, African people had already mastered herbal medicine, surgery, nutrition, and spiritual healing. Our ancestors understood the human body with a depth that continues to amaze historians and scientists today. This story is not widely told, because colonial history tried to erase our contributions, but the truth remains. African medicine is thousands of years older and far more sophisticated than most people ever realized. In ancient Kemet, known today as medical textbooks existed more than 1,000 years before Hippocrates was born. These texts include the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which is the world's oldest known surgical manual. It describes fractures, injuries, treatments, and even early forms of brain anatomy. The Ebers Papyrus, an even larger document, lists hundreds of herbal treatments for conditions like stomach problems, skin conditions, infections, reproductive issues, pain, parasites, and more. These ancient Africans diagnosed illnesses, predicted outcomes, and recommended treatments with a scientific approach that is still respected today. They used tools, sutures, splints, surgical knives, and detailed observation techniques. But African healing was not only about the body. It was a holistic system that saw the person as a complete living being connected to nature, ancestors, diet, energy, and environment. To our ancestors, disease could come from imbalance, from emotional or spiritual disruption, from lifestyle, or from environmental toxins. Healing required restoring harmony. That is why herbalists, spiritual healers, midwives, bone setters, and diviners all played important roles in African societies. They didn't separate mental health from physical health, or diet from treatment. Everything was connected. Herbal medicine was a core part of daily life. Africans used aloe for cleansing and inflammation, garlic for immunity, senna for digestion, castor oil for internal cleansing, myrrh and frankincense for infections, hibiscus for blood pressure, honey for wounds, cinnamon for circulation, and hundreds of other plants. These remedies were not random. They were documented, studied, tested over centuries, and passed down through families and healing communities. But Africa's healing knowledge was not limited to Kemet. Across the entire continent, advanced medical traditions existed long before colonial interruption. In East Africa, Ethiopian healers used enset, ginger, rue, black cumin, and aloe species to treat infections, reproductive issues, and digestive problems. Some Ethiopian monasteries even stored written medical manuscripts with formulas and spiritual prayers for healing. In the Congo Basin, traditional healers, known as Inganga, used iboga, kola nut, kinkaliba, bitter roots, tree box, and forest herbs with deep spiritual and medicinal power. Their knowledge came from observing the environment, animal behavior, and ancestral teachings. In West Africa, herbalists used neem for infections, baobab for nutrition, bitter leaf for blood cleansing, hibiscus for blood pressure, shea tree bark for inflammation, and soursop leaves for immune support. They created powerful herbal tonics long before Europeans understood the plants they later exported. Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Beninese healing systems included bone setting, midwifery, spiritual balancing, and herbal mastery. In southern Africa, Sangomas and Iyangas used African potato for immunity, devil's claw for inflammation and arthritis, wild garlic for respiratory problems, urinary tract infections, and Amelanyan, also known as African Artemisia, for fever, cold, flu, and even malaria symptoms. Mfefo was used for spiritual cleansing, mental clarity, and communication with ancestors. When colonizers arrived, they did not bring medicine to Africa. They encountered already existing, highly developed medical systems, but they labeled African healers as primitive witches, even while secretly relying on African herbs for survival. Europeans used quinine from African forests to protect themselves from malaria. They used African aloe for skin and digestive issues. They used African tonics to fight fever. While claiming superiority, they depended heavily on African knowledge. Colonial systems attempted to erase African medicine by banning practices, burning healing centers, and forcing Western medical views on African communities. But the knowledge survived. It survived through oral traditions, through families passing down the secrets, through elders teaching through rituals and ceremonies, through memory and resistance. African medicine could never be destroyed because it lives in the land, into plants, and in the people. Reclaiming African medicine today is not just about using herbs. It is an act of identity. It is an act of returning to ourselves. African people are descendants of scientists, botanists, nutritionists, midwives, and spiritual scholars. Our ancestors studied the stars, the body, the soil, the seasons, and the spirit. They built medical knowledge through observation, intuition, experimentation, and wisdom. They built systems that Western science only recently began to understand. Herbal medicine is rising again today because modern people are realizing the power of natural healing. But African people must understand that this is not a trend for us. It is a return home. Many of the diseases affecting our communities today, diabetes, hypertension, inflammation, obesity, digestive disorders, can be supported by African plants and traditional diets, not as a replacement for medical care, but as a complementary system that restores balance. Returning to African food is also medicine. Traditional diets rich in millet, sorghum, leafy greens, legumes, indigenous vegetables, roots, and fruits kept our ancestors strong and disease-resistant. The shift to processed foods, sugar, oils, and Western lifestyles created many of the health problems we battle today. When we return to our indigenous foods, herbs, and healing traditions, we return to harmony. African medicine is powerful because it treats the person, not just the symptoms. It brings mind, body, spirit, and environment together. It teaches responsibility for one's health. It teaches relationship with nature. It teaches respect for community and ancestors. It reminds us that healing is not something done to you. Healing is something done with you. African medicine is a living system. It is not stuck in the past. It continues to evolve as new plants are studied, new formulations are created, and new healers rise. What remains constant is the philosophy. Healing is balance. Healing is connection. Healing is cultural memory. Africa healed the world before the world even knew what medicine was. Our ancestors laid the foundation for medical science long before other civilizations learned to write. They understood anatomy, diagnosis, herbal chemistry, nutrition, and spiritual harmony. They built hospitals, studied diseases, and documented treatments centuries before their contributions were stolen or ignored. Today, reclaiming African medicine is part of reclaiming African pride. It is part of rebuilding Black consciousness. It is part of teaching our children where they truly come from, not from a place of inferiority, but from a place of genius, strength, and innovation. When we use African herbs, African diets, African healing rituals, and African spiritual wisdom, we are not practicing something old. We are practicing something eternal. We are remembering who we are. We are reconnecting with the knowledge written in our blood. We are returning to the first science, the first pharmacy, the first hospital, the first healer. Africa itself